that previous version didn't get recorded. So thank you so much for joining. September 2022 club meeting, the Oktoberfest meeting edition with, we have all of our friends here, and we have some guests, and it's always just an open forum to kind of be collaborative and talk. But JP from Bierly Brewing, thank you so much for joining. Bob Keifer, Divine Science and author extraordinaire, is here. Jesse Bufton from Groundbreaker Brewing, also here in like a dark, shadowy room within Portland.
Deep throat.
Trying to stay away from the heat. Cool, yeah. So yeah, let me share my screen. We have a little bit of an agenda, and if anyone has any questions or anything like that at any time, just hold on. Escape. Let's try that again. Let me share my screen. Sure. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Yes.
Awesome. Cool. Just a few updates, and then I'm going to hand it over to Stu to go over a couple of topics that he has some slides on. So the club is now on Instagrams. There was a old Instagram that Joe Morris has started that I don't have access to, so I just created a new account under ZTGF Homebrews. So if you're into Instagram, follow us, like us, yada yada yada. Bob's book, I asked him if you want to jump on and be part of the roundtable, and then maybe just give him like a couple minutes on the book and all that kind of stuff. So Bob, if you want to give us a couple minutes on your book and say how it's going, when it's being released, where it's being released, where you can get it, the floor is yours for a couple minutes.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks Cale. I probably would have came regardless of whether or not I had the opportunity to talk about the book, but it is fun. It really represents kind of everything leading up to this point, I guess, in the gluten-free brewing world, or circa 2021 when the copy was due. There actually has been some changes since I finished the actual manuscript. That was actually one of the things that made this book so interesting to write, was the fact that there was so much innovation just in between 2019 and 2021. Those 2 years saw over 15 different new gluten-free malts added. It saw research coming from universities, like domestic universities, not just ones in Australia, which is pretty much where most of the university research, really was kind of, that was cited in the book, had come from. So I think that's some of the things that's really kind of cool is, we haven't necessarily reached mainstream yet. I mean, I think that is what this book will hopefully help do better. But it's just so interesting. Like we had a couple that had come in on like Friday at the tap room, and when this man started dating this woman, he found out she was gluten-free, and so he called around to every brewery in Orange County and asked them if they had any gluten-free beer on tap, and they all told him to F off. And it's really interesting that we're in 2022 and we're still having those sorts of responses to it, right? I live in a very there's a very like quiet culture of almost prejudice about this style of brewing. So I think one of the things that I'm really hoping to do is to evangelize it more, and to really demonstrate something that Joe Morris said. I actually had a chance, after finding out the news about Ed Golden this week, I was heavily distraught. Had a chance to kind of go through the grieving process, and had a chance to listen to that podcast that I was on with him on basic brewing. And Joe had a saying, he scored a 38 with his, I believe it was his IPA at NHC, National Homebrewers Competition. This was in 2018, I believe. And Jim had asked the question, why go through all this trouble? Why go through all this, effort just to make a beer? When you could potentially just use a reducing enzyme, if you will. And Joe said it best, I think, when he said, if I can score 38 with millet, buckwheat, and rice, I don't need barley. And that's something that, really, allowed me to really, kind of get my mindset back in order, after kind of going through that once I heard the news about Ed. Because Ed was such a huge influence for me, specifically as a brewer. That Scottish wee heavy that I tasted of his back in 2018 was magical. And the fact that he did it without using any exogenous enzymes, it really kind of like floored me. And I was kind of like, okay, there is so much more to this. And that's, I really would say that Ed is probably one of the biggest inspirations for me writing this book, right? And there's 2 recipes in this book that honor Ed. And, I'm just so happy to have had the opportunity by Brewers Publications to put our voice out there. This really is what I truly believe to be, as best as I can put it in my own words, the voice of the gluten-free brewing community, and the strength that it has, and the resiliency that it has, and its ability to face adversity in any way, shape, or form, because that is what the life of a gluten-free person is just ripe with. And to be able to transcend that and to use those elements, right? There's a passage in the book that was actually really, I would really give that credit to Kale and Stuart, saying that basically goes, this is a style of brewing that is not just informed by what it lacks, barley, wheat, and rye, but really what is used when we make these grain, we make these ancient grain beers, essentially. So that's something that really moves me, is that element, right? That to go so far into the deep end, this is really the true frontier of brewing, right? Every person that's on this call is a pioneer in their own way, right? Especially because literally every single successive batch of beer that we brew together as a community, our knowledge base grows, specifically because there is so little research in the space. And I really do hope that this book can lead to some additional grants for research. There's no reason why we should be flying so blind as brewers, right? Kind of just going by trial and error when you have such an epic amount of documentation when it comes to barley. So I hope that we can at least, there's probably no chance that we'll ever equal that playing field in terms of investment, but to at least get some, and then to be able to, brew with knowledge, brew confidently. That is my hope for our community, with this book.
Excellent. Thank you, Bob. Thanks. And I'm sure I already have my copy, so everybody go out and buy a copy. And it's available where on Brewers Publications and Amazon and everywhere where you would normally find. Correct.
I believe Gluten-Free Homebrewing is also selling it.
And Gluten-Free Homebrewing. Okay.
Gluten-Free Brew Supply might be picking it up. I'm not sure.
Okay. Cool.
Also on sale in the tap room.
Awesome. Let's see. So club numbers wise, it's been a while since we had a meeting. So I threw up there that I didn't throw up, but we have almost 1,700 members. Very, very excellent. So there's still getting people. The club is still growing and growing and growing. So that's fantastic. So now we're going to try something different. I'm going to hand it over to Stu, and we're going to try to see, we're going to give this a go. We're going to do a little trivia thing, Oktoberfest trivia thing that Stu's queued up and worked on. And then he's going to give us a rundown of his view or his visit that he had to Skagit Valley Malting with Brian Thiel from Ghostfish was there as well. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Stu.
Cool, thank you. Okay, Cal, I'm gonna share my screen here, see if this works. Hang on.
And
I think you shared your screen once.
Yeah. Okay, all right, so we've never done this before. Let's try trivia here. Okay,
so play from our phones.
You can do this from your phones. So here's the thing. You can either type in this kahoot.it or use that QR code to pull it out. And I'm going to give you a couple minutes to
And you
Yeah.
don't need to get the app. You can just do it on the browser.
Yeah, the app
We
will
tested it
take
out
time.
before.
Oh, there we go. Excellent.
We've got sound effects and everything.
No, even the sound.
Musical and everything.
The schnozberries taste like schnozberries.
Okay, we got 4 of you. Who else?
Very German.
4, 5.
So gorgeous.
Tim, are you in?
I'm working on it.
Working on it. I'll give you a second.
Wow, I didn't realize there was chickens and music. This
Yeah,
is
I know the
fantastic.
whole
Wow.
thing. This is exactly what Oktoberfest is like. Just
The authentic experience.
very the rural Oktoberfest. Okay. Are we in? Okay. We got 8 questions. So get ready, and you get points for not just accuracy but speed. So don't linger.
Okay, okay.
All right, gonna read this out. Where it was first held in 1810 to do what? Oh,
Yes. Oh my gosh. Wow.
Dum,
You guys are
dum,
freaking
dum.
smart.
What?
good start.
It's
All
like,
right.
who here has read the logger book?
Fastest. Okay, here we go. Round 2. Nationality, the first brewer to create the Bohemian Pilsner. Pilsner Cal.
Gosh.
This could go a couple ways, actually. Yeah.
Oh dang.
Yeah. Here Joseph Groll was the guy's name, and he was a Bavarian brewer. He was hired by the town of Pilsen and then returned in 1847, I think. So
German monk style, baby. What's up?
German brewer of the original Czech Pilsner. Okay, next round. What are noble hops?
Oh. Oh man, I gotta go with green on that one.
Oh, almost.
Yes.
Okay. All right, Bob is out front now. JP can still, you can still get this, and Jesse's coming up and from the end.
Creeping
Bob's
up.
brain is so big. Oh my god.
Oh my God.
Do I get kicked out the club if I finish last?
No,
It's on my Neanderthal DNA.
the
Watch
next
out.
round.
But first and last, cool.
No. Okay, next round. We're halfway there. When did the 1516 purity law come into effect for all of Germany? Potentially a trick question. It's not.
I have no idea.
German unification, baby. Of course, I don't know when that was.
I'm gonna go with 42.
Oh,
Oh,
No, it was when
1906.
Bavaria was.
6.
Everybody got it wrong.
It was
No.
you know, so
There.
you said I didn't know the
This
Reinhardt.
isn't covered in the logger book.
Yeah, yeah.
it was actually that was the one condition that Bavaria put on them joining the German Union was that they adopt it across all of Germany.
right because
But
it
I
was
just didn't know what year it was.
Was
You
it
would-
1842 that they added yeast to the list? Because it had only been malt, hops, and water previously.
yeah. I don't
And
know.
the
what that
magic
is.
spoon.
That's
And
why.
magic. It was the magic spoon.
Magic, yeah.
So the Reinheitsgebot, I didn't know that didn't come into that phrase didn't start until 1916. That's why I put that number up there. That's a relatively new concept or term.
There.
Okay. All right, Bob. Well done.
All right.
Anybody seen the Netflix series Oktoberfest Beer and Blood?
No, I had no.
Oh, yeah, it's a classic.
I got no idea.
It's all in German.
Uh,
You have to use stuff that is okay.
man, I'm
Oh, we got some-
doing so
yeah.
bad.
Yeah. I'm glad that some people like the blood sausage vendor idea though. That's good.
The tent size is a very big deal. It's
Oh my
very-
god, I'm in last
It is.
place.
Yeah, the tent size is what it's about.
See,
Yeah.
Ed, I'm doing you a solid here.
There you go.
Not
Yeah.
the size of the tent.
I don't know what we'd do if you get kicked out though.
You become the president. All right, 6. So what beer style introduced in 1841 became the Oktoberfest beer by 1870? Done, everybody.
Is not the Oktoberfest beer style anymore, but it is America.
True.
Right. JP, which one would you call it? Would you call it Fest beer or Helles? now?
Fest beer, according to and according to print literature, is what the official name is now. But
Yeah,
Americans think it's Märzen. It's a higher alcohol than a true Helles is.
Right.
I have a stack of books right here. It's a higher alcohol, so I don't think it's fair to call it a Helles. But yeah, it's Fest beer according to the Germans.
So
I think
JP's
also-
taking an open book quiz right now.
Come on.
I got the books right here. He
Look
told
at
me.
this.
Cheating.
Okay, JP got points for that one.
Ooh.
All right, closing in 2 more. The special ingredient pretzels to give them their color and texture. One more.
Oh,
Yep,
God,
lie. That was it.
brutal.
That was the
Why
one.
is not used in Bierly Brewing pretzels?
No. Baking soda.
Baking
Or-
soda. Yeah.
Yeah, sodium bicarbonate.
Okay. It is a little. I did ask my wife whether she'd allow me to make live pretzels, and I got a no-go on that one. Okay. Ooh, Jesse's on fire. Like
Oh, man.
having a streak. Okay, last true or false. The chicken dance was written to celebrate Germany's win over England at the 1970 FIFA World Cup.
Oh
This
God.
might be important for you to be able to answer. We're all familiar with the chicken dance, right?
I
Okay.
have a 50% chance. Damn it.
I wish it was true though. That would have been so poetic. It would have been great. All right, so podium. First place, Seth.
Ooh, nice. Wow.
Hey.
Nice.
That
JP.
JP, oh my gosh.
Surprise, the guy with the most German name wins.
Oh, but it was close.
I don't know. Bob
Freaked me
Keifer's a
out.
pretty German name.
You
Fair.
can't beat Bierly for German names. I'm sorry.
All right, well, thank you for participating in our first trivia event.
Stu, thanks for doing that. That was super cool. That was
Good.
fun.
Good, good,
That was
good.
dope.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. Awesome.
Right.
Yeah, that
That
one.
was a blast.
Maybe we'll reprise that sometime in the future. Okay. And now on to more serious topics. I have a little slideshow from a,
Putting a lot of trust in you sharing your screen, okay, Stuart?
I know, you never know what's on that other window.
We're just
Okay.
lulling you into a false sense of security, and here comes the punishment, part
Oh.
2.
No,
Oh wait,
I missed
So-
it. Oh, are you seeing my? Is
no,
this
we're is the same thing as
That-
before. We're seeing like your
how do I-
Presenter
I
note.
think this
yeah,
is
presenter.
your internet browser?
I think you did display settings.
There we go.
Yeah. There
You
you
did
go.
it.
Perfect. Awesome.
Okay. All right. So while some of you were sleeping off a post anniversary party hangover, I was on the road to Skagit Valley Malt in Burlington. And yeah, so Brian from Ghostfish invited us to come up. Kale was not with me, unfortunately, but Brian and Tay from Ghostfish were there. So we got to look around, and I'm just going to share real quick kind of what I saw. So Skagit Valley Malting is about halfway between Seattle and Vancouver. So here's the setting for this place. And there are actually 2 buildings. This is the kind of the big storage area with grain silos. So the real quick thing, I'm going to go through this pretty quick. The grain silos there are actually not for any of the gluten-free grains that they malt. So they've got, you know, like, I don't know, 10 different silos, but that's all for barley. And I think they do some other gluten-containing grains, maybe some wheat. On the you know, barley front, it is kind of cool what they're doing with local farmers to basically, you know, kind of develop some local malting capacity there. But from a gluten-free perspective, all that stuff comes in these totes, which I'll show you in a second. And they're stored separately. None of it goes through these silos or, you know, through the grain elevators or, you know, anything like that. It's totally separate. So this is just for context. And these totes, so this is like the unit of measure for Skagit Valley. These are like a metric ton, so about 2,000 pounds of grain in each one of these. So these were in the malt house, but so I'm not sure that we're looking at millet here, but I did ask just in terms of how those come in, how they're kept separate, and they are apparently wrapped and kept quite separate from the other stuff. And just in terms of sourcing, so the millet comes from Colorado. It's a farm that only grows, I don't know if it's just millet, but there's certainly no gluten-free grains that they intersperse or are rotating in. And the same is true for the buckwheat, which comes from Washington, is my understanding. And then they've got these 7 tanks. They're all-in-one tanks, so they're not doing any floor malting or you know, some malt houses have separate tanks for steeping and germination and the kilning. This is all in this one all-in-one system they've got. And you can, you know, they're pretty massive. So there's, you know, just for scale, there's the people standing next to it. So they're pretty big. They do 20,000 pounds. So it's about 10 of those totes go into these things. You know, I guess the thing that impressed me about that operation is just there was nothing that I saw that was haphazard. I will give them credit for thinking through every aspect of this. So, you know, from the general malting piece that they've been doing for several years now to even how would they address, you know, doing gluten-free. That was another new challenge, both from a, you know, cross-contamination perspective, but also from a you know, just the, you know, size of the grain and dealing with the unique properties of gluten-free grains. So I will give them credit. They're a bunch of engineers, and that was kind of the thing that came across to me mostly. It was just how much thinking they put into this. They're pretty transparent. They're, you know, I don't think they recognize that it's you know, it's maybe challenging some people's sort of expectations around you know, a dedicated facility. And I don't, you know, they're not, I didn't get the impression that they, you know, are trying to dispel any, you know, worries around it. I think that they take the process pretty seriously. And in the malt house, so in this stage, you know, what I saw, I was pretty impressed with, and just in terms of how they keep the stuff separate. So there really was, you know, one of the things that I noticed was really essentially no dust flying through here. The you know, these units are kind of doing all stages. So the kilning, all the stuff is kind of getting sucked up through this power vac. Now, you know, I don't have enough malting knowledge to be able to tell you exactly what this thing is doing, but again, these units just kind of slowly turning through, and they've got these the access doors for pulling grain in and out, and then some sample ports for that stuff. But yeah, again, I was pretty impressed with what I saw here in a malting facility itself. So then back in that big facility that I showed you with the, you know, next to the silos, they've got basically all their storage, and this is where the bagging happens. So this is their bagging machine. So each of these totes kind of slips in under the machine, and then it kind of gets up into this bin and sucked into the bagger, basically, where they then kind of thread it closed. So, and my observation to them then too was, if there was one place that would probably give me concerns around just cross contamination, this probably would be the place, just given the it is shared equipment, and so that there is that potential. They do go through a cleaning process when they do a gluten-free run of things, so they're not interspersing it frequently with the other grains, and they so they have SOPs for this as well, and they do testing. So last slide here, they've got essentially 3 points for testing. One is the raw grain that comes in from the growers after they've malted it, so after it comes out of the single vessel kilns that I showed you, and then at that post packaging stage. So they are doing tests, and they are they said that it did require some refinement to their SOPs. They have made some changes to that, and they are going through certification. So they are working with GFCO. They don't have the certification yet, but that's something that they are looking to do. So yeah, again, I think they were fairly transparent about where they're at in the process, what they do, and I think recognizing that it's not going to be everyone's game, that not everyone's going to be totally comfortable with it, but from what I saw, would I use malt from here? And I would have to say, yeah, I would. I was fairly impressed with what I saw. So yeah, that's it. I'm happy to. I don't have a lot more information, but if you guys have questions.
I had a question on the roasters, the self-contained roasters. So I'm assuming that the GF stuff they do is pretty limited, and that they don't have one dedicated just for gluten-free stuff, or is that inaccurate?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so they're not doing any roasting, by the way, of
Oh,
the
okay.
gluten-free malts.
Sorry,
So
the
that
malt machines, I guess.
yeah, so they get through the kilning stage. So they you can get up to they make a caramel malt. So just to give you an idea of how much that is, you can get some color and sort of crystal-like qualities. But they do have roasters that they use for their gluten containing grains, but that's separate. Yeah, and you're right. Yeah, it was one of the questions I had, and actually on the website I had a look again yesterday. So either this is new information or maybe it's old information that they haven't corrected yet. I'm not sure which, but they did say on the website that they had one of those vessels was dedicated for gluten-free.
Oh, interesting. Oh,
But I don't think that's necessarily the case. My impression is that there's just so much going through there. They've got so much turnover that they've got to use all 7 machines. They're pretty much going nonstop.
It's probably one machine that they do use, but it's also uses other stuff. They wouldn't switch it around between the 7, just the one.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
Stu, are they only doing one vessel at a time for volume wise?
Yeah, I think the demand is pretty low still.
20,000 pounds is a lot.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so when you look around the warehouse, I don't have photos of the rest of it, but you had totes and stacks of other types of barley malts, and this is the gluten-free section was pretty small in comparison.
Do you know how many distinct malts they have?
Yeah, I mean, they're just doing a base millet and a caramel, and then they've got which I don't even think is listed. I think they're just listing their base millet and their base buckwheat malts.
Okay.
And then the caramel's like a C10 is what I've been told.
Yeah, I thought it was a little higher than that. I heard it was like maybe 40.
The picture
Yeah.
is 40.
It's something like that.
Yeah.
Price wise, is it comparable, say, to grouse?
In terms of the base malts?
Yeah, base malt price wise per pound.
Yes. Yeah, it's basically the same on the wholesale level, Jesse. It's essentially the same as grouse, but you don't get a dedicated facility.
Interesting.
Interesting. Did you get a chance to try any? Like, did you like put it in your mouth and chew it and try it?
No, there was really nothing, it wasn't a production day that I was there. So it was,
Sure.
um,
I would have just brought a box cutter and just started slitting that.
You may not have been invited back, but
For sure. Hey, dude, I'm you know,
I will,
about the science. About the science.
yeah, they were really friendly. I got to say, they were actually very welcoming. They took a fair amount of time to answer questions about it, and I think they'd be happy to have other people visit. So I think if you're in the area or want to make a visit, I would definitely reach out to them if you at all interested. I think it is an interesting experience. I haven't had a chance to see grouse or Eckert myself, so this is kind of my first time in a malt house, and but the process overall is really cool.
I'd be interested in seeing their cleaning SOP, since that's kind of what I do for a living, is sanitation SOPs.
Yeah,
Because really in that kind of environment, the only thing you can really do is dry cleaning. Forced, high pressure air, stuff like that.
right.
You can use alcohol to do a wet clean by hand, but I
Yeah.
don't, I mean, I deal with a lot of bread plants and stuff, and there's dust everywhere. I don't know how they could get it clean.
It looks like they have vacuum pumps on their augers that pump into the whatever that side vessel is on the sideways tank.
Yeah.
So I'd be curious.
Be interesting to see how clean they get.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I did ask about the cleaning SOP for the bagger, and of course they don't use any, it's not a wet clean at all.
Yeah, you can't. Yeah,
you couldn't do that. So
So
I
our
think
biggest
the
hesitation
interesting
was that
thing-
we didn't have a dedicated mill yet in our production, because they don't have a dedicated mill. We buy all of our grain pre-milled
Mhm.
at Divine Science, so that we don't ever have to cross-contaminate with a mill and auger.
Yeah.
That was the thing where it's like, okay, well, if we ever get one, maybe it's something that we can consider. So yeah.
I've had a few conversations with them, and the last time it's been probably 2 months since I gave them a call, because actually, interestingly, every time I go up to deliver beer in Seattle, I think about them, and I sometimes give them a call and talk to them. And the last time I had a conversation with them was probably 2 months ago. And I had just reviewed their website, and their website said that they were 6 months into gathering data. And so I kind of questioned that a little bit and like where they were at, because I wanted to know where they were at. And they actually said their website was about 6 months out of date at that point, 2 months ago. And that at 2 months ago, it had been about a year that they had samples on.
Yeah.
And I think that the thing that comes down, I mean, of course, for Bob and Jesse and I,
Yeah.
it's a different concern. I'm very interested in what they're doing and if they can do it. But also every choice that I make personally, I don't make for myself. I make for every single customer of Bierly. And I have to, and like you may, any one of you that are brewing beer for yourself and brewing beer for, the people that might be totally comfortable with whatever choice you want to make. And when Jesse and Bob and I make that choice, we have to make that choice for every single person. And obviously we come down in different places. Each one of us come down in different places. Each different brewery comes down in a different place. And so I'm not going to say no, never. I'm just going to say there's a pretty high bar there for Bierly. The other thing too for Bierly is we play more with specialties, and we could probably get into that in the round table. We play more with specialties at Bierly than we do with pale. Yeah. And so a malt house that really only focuses on pale millet, pale buckwheat, and maybe a C45 millet is pretty limited use case for us, because I don't actually order that much pale.
Right. Yeah.
Fair.
Thank you, Stu. That was like way more information than I had before. And, I've gotten some info from JP. Thank you, JP, for passing along all the stuff I had previously learned about what they were doing there. But seeing the facility and just like hearing your perspective on your walkthrough, that's like super appreciated. Thanks for doing that.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was interesting. I mean, it was an invite, and I thought, you know, it'd be good to share the info I got. Again, you know, but JP, you said it really well. I mean, I think you know, certainly at the commercial level, you guys have to each make that call for your customers, and you know what that expectation is. As a home brewer, it's totally the same. I mean, like, even using you know, oat malt in a beer that I make is, you know, I appreciate that that's works for me, but it wouldn't necessarily for, well, you know, for Kale, for example. I'm not gonna share a, or for you. Yeah. So yeah, and in Australia, it's not even, you know, thought of as a gluten-free grain. So anyway, I totally appreciate that perspective. And but yeah, again, I wanted to share what I saw. Again, I was impressed, because there, you know, when you hear about it, when you just read about it, it's, you know, there's still a ton of questions. And I would say, I imagine there are a lot of other maltsters who are playing around with gluten-free grains and are much more haphazard than these guys are. So, you know, I would think there's a pretty big spectrum in terms of how you deal with stuff. So anyway.
Yeah, just wanted to add on top of that. Thank you, Stu. This is great. A couple of things that come to mind in thinking about this is there's also, from a commercial level, kind of a supply chain thing, if you will, too, right? And I everything JP said, it's totally, I agree with 100%. From a supply chain, I mean, gluten-free grains, right? You have a really small, I mean, it's like what, just one provider of really that most people buy from in the world, basically, right? So I think if you look at that and say, well, what happens if this place like ceases to exist, right? If you don't have, I mean, that's your whole business, right? Your whole business just goes poof, gone, right? If you're, so I get why people within the industry had looked and said, hey, is there another way that we could create another source for these grains, right? So it might not be perfect, right? Same thing with, like, you know, contract brewing on someone's barley brewing system, right? Maybe not ideal, right? But if you go through those, you know, protocols and testing, and I think that I get a much warmer, fuzzier feeling than the email response that I got back from them a couple of years ago, which was basically, we don't do anything, right? I'm summarizing that, and that's maybe not 100% accurate, but it didn't sound like at the time that they had any kind of like certifications or anything like that, right? So to have what you've seen, and I think it was really opaque from like you know, a brewer's perspective, that we knew like this place existed and they're you know, mainly malting barley, and it's like, oh, they're doing millet too. That's kind of crazy. But so thank you so much for kind of shedding some light on what that looks like. That's fantastic.
Yeah, no,
And
my
Stu,
pleasure.
I want to thank you too, because I don't want to have anybody get the impression that I'm overly negative about them. I am really excited to see what's going on there, and I have not visited because I do not want to. I don't want them to have my number more than they already do, if you know what I mean. So I really appreciate the pictures and the information that you have, because that helps, I think, all of us to see better before we actually go there exactly what they've got going on. So thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
yeah.
you for that.
Thanks, Stu.
Excellent. Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, one thing that, like, last thing on this is Sue and I were offline, and I think that they're trying to possibly get a source for grains that's a little bit more local. To get, you know, millet shipped from Colorado kind of seems counter to the whole like, I don't know, it just seems like it adds a bunch of costs that maybe is unnecessary. I think, Stu, you had mentioned that they were trying to like get some source of grains within Eastern Washington. And
Yeah, I
that
mean,
could,
I think, yeah, with WSU, right, there's
Mhm.
some research being done to look at, you know, the option of growing millet specifically, and buckwheat, quinoa. Actually, that whole program, I think, is really kind of innovative.
Yeah, awesome. So let's get into it. Let's get into the main topic. Oh man, that was what a day. So I wanted to just have this as kind of an open roundtable, and what the thinking was. We're just kind of go over like the and Stu might poo-poo this slide, so that's why I called it Oktoberfest / German beers. But I just want to go over, here's the typical styles that we see. One thing about over the course of time is it seems like from a commercial level, at least, things have changed dramatically onto availability of some of the things you see up on your screen now. I mean, when I first started drinking commercial gluten-free beer back in 2015, 2016, there was nothing out there at all for any of these styles. It was pale ales and IPAs and maybe a stout, and that's about it.
That's me in the UK now.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So
About 7 years behind.
yeah. So but now you see all sorts of different iterations of these as tap house type brews, and even things that have been canned and bottled. And so from a high level,
He
these
was in
are
the vanguard of these styles, I guess.
what's that?
JP was in the vanguard. You were brewing some of these beers in early days, I'm guessing.
This is my basically dream lineup right here. This is what I think about at night. It's this
JP
list from
Jam.
this list from top to bottom. I've had 2/3 of these on tap in the last 3 months at my tasting room.
So let's just maybe we can throw it out here for everyone to just kind of say, hey, from this list, what is your favorite? What have you brewed before? Just maybe give a little high. I'll go first, right? So for me, recently, I've been really into Kolsch, and that was because of Ben Fowler. He posted up this awesome post of this super clear beer and said it was amazing, and so I just had to brew that. So I brewed a Kolsch 10-gallon batch, split it into two different fermenters with different yeast strains. So that one was probably like one of my top favorites. But anyone else, like, just give us like your take on these different styles.
I think the second beer I ever brewed was the Pilsner. I think it might have been Stuart's recipe, potentially, or it was someone
Nice.
from one of the online forums. But yeah, that one went well.
Nice.
That turned out well. You like that?
Yeah. Compared to the first one was a extract sorghum, and there's a kit supplier in the UK, and it was just with hop extracts rather than any actual hops. So yeah, it wasn't the nicest of beers, but for the first try, it wasn't bad.
Excellent.
The Hefeweizen is actually the only one on this list that I have never done successfully. I have brewed so many Hefeweizens, and Bob, I think I've had a couple of yours. And the only one that I've ever enjoyed was Ed Golden's Hefeweizen,
That beer was so good.
because it tastes
Very good.
exactly like König Ludwig Hefeweizen, as I remember it. And it was batch 3 that I brewed of his. I have the recipe. I also have his recipe for batch 4. It was a super simple grain build. It was like with his, because the numbers were all over the place because he didn't use any outside enzymes, exogenous enzymes. It was like 12 pounds of pale millet, 1 pound of James Brown rice, and 2 pounds of red split lentils. And that was it. And then like 20 IBUs of whatever noble. And that beer tasted exactly like König Ludwig Weiss. And I got close once, but it was a Crystal Weizen. And I've tried probably a dozen batches of that and of my own. And that's the one beer that I continually never sell because it's just not right yet.
That's fair.
Go.
Yeah.
I need to check my cellar. I haven't had a chance to check my cellar, but I might have some Ed Golden beers that I've kept.
Oh, wow.
And I'll let people know if I am correct on that.
Crazy.
But I think I might have a couple bottles of this Hefeweizen because I was so impressed by that beer. most of his beers were amazing, but that beer in particular I thought was really impressive, just in the techniques and in the finished product that he had with that. So
does anybody remember? Because I remember what the finishing gravity was on that beer.
Wasn't it 1.015? I have it. Is this an open book test? Because I have it.
I mean, the one that I tried at HomebrewCon, the finishing gravity on that one was 1022.
Yeah. I mean, the
Wow.
thing was his beers were perfect, and they were like 3% alcohol.
Yeah.
But they tasted perfect. They were just 2% alcohol.
Maybe all those enzymes are just drying all those beers out that we're doing. Maybe that's the key.
Here we go.
Oh yeah.
Heffelinson, his Heffelinson number 3. I have it right here, including that's actually his handwriting there. I took a picture of his menu, and his final gravity was 1.012.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, that was 1.01.
Well, he had been calling me about a couple beers. Maybe this was batch 1 or 2, because he called me on the phone about a Heffelinson batch that he did, where like, and he was like, how are you finishing at 002, 008, like so consistently when I'm struggling to get past 1018, you know? And I was like, you know, maybe you do a longer steep, you know, in your second rest, you know, like there's a lot of different ideas. I'm still so surprised though, because that beer was literally like 3% flat at the NHC. So that's interesting. Maybe I got the 2 right. I guess I missed the 1.
Well, that was an earlier one. I think his NHC was higher because he ended up using a lot of biscuit rice in the heat. Ed preferred it was like 30% biscuit rice in the batch that he preferred. The earlier one that I kind of threw out the recipe on, that was the one that I thought tasted more like the Hefeweizen I liked, but Ed actually preferred a different a recipe. And so I think that might have been the one that was 2.2 or something like that.
Well, something that's been like kind of like digging at my mind ever since the XGM study came out from UPenn is this element when you look at the sugar chart in his findings, there seems to be a novel lack of maltotetriose, which is really interesting. Specifically because one of the things that pretty much almost any taster of gluten-free beer comments on is they're like, oh, this feels thinner or crisper or lighter.
It's so refreshing.
So refreshing, right? And I believe it is because there could very well be this lack of that specific malt sugar. And that really comes down to the shape of the starch and what the specific enzymes we're throwing at these starches creates in the mash. Specifically because, like, you know, no, not really any sort of, you know, recognizable beta amylase, if you will, right? That's really still specific to barley. I mean, when we look at teff, that could be something new on the horizon, which is exciting. But that was one of the things that was really interesting is I had this conversation, you know, Joe, Ed and I used to just literally like have group calls for hours on end sometimes. And I said something back in like, this must have been like early 2019 or maybe late 2018, where, and I had just finished reading like the NHC like Go for Gold issue from Zymergy, and there was a Doppelbock recipe in there that had finished, the finishing gravity was 1045. That was a gold medal winning Doppelbock, and I was like, I could make a whole other beer with the finishings of that beer.
Yeah, that's
you know, I'm like, that's egregious. That's like literally type 2 diabetes, like knocking at your door.
Well, yeah, I mean, probably what you've got there is just like higher dextrins that won't ferment out, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, you have to have that, especially if it's going to survive the packaging and sending off to NHC to be judged, right? So that was something that was really interesting to me because and then I was like combining that with the finishing gravity on a lot of Ed's beers, and then still tasting so good and having that full mouthfeel that, you know, I haven't drank barley beer in a long time. I still remember it though. And that was something that I was like, okay, maybe there is something to this. And, you know, in order to do the things that we want to do as gluten-free brewers, we may need to think of finishing gravities in a different context because of that lack of specific sugars that we may have in our mashes.
I think the trick is making sure it's a balanced beer at the end of the day, right? Regardless.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah. I mean, just be a little bit more heavy-handed with the hops. I'm totally cool with that.
You'd never see these commercially, even in barley breweries, rarely, but I'm such a huge fan of alt beer. That's like one of my favorite styles of beer.
Yeah.
And Kolsch would be my other one, which happen to be like the two that I would say, and other people may disagree with this, but are like the least stable shelf wise, like on a commercial scale. Like those beers are both meant to be drunk pretty quickly from the time they're packaged. So I don't know that we'll ever produce those at Groundbreaker, but I love those styles of beer. We are getting ready to do a Schwartz beer, which I'm pretty excited about. I think that's going to be our fall seasonal.
Nice.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, Marzen is interesting to me because like the barley versions of Marzen, I remember very delicious, but I've personally always kind of struggled with this kind of brownish colored or copper colored gluten-free brews. I don't know, maybe I just had bad luck on the grain bills, but I feel like some of them just come through as just this taste just super awful. I don't know what it is.
Ready for the style, or what are you referring to?
Like I feel like I have these, I did like a red ale, right? And it just, well, part of it is that it didn't carb up and it was in bottles, but it had this like terrible kind of, it was a bitterness, like kind of acrid from like dark, I think there was some kind of dark millet I had put in there, and it just kind of clashed with, I just could never get a good like, brownish reddish type of beer that I liked to drink, right?
Can I give you some tips?
How about some unsolicited advice? We've got a lot of it.
Yeah, right. That's why we're here, right? It's a round table, right? Okay. So did you have merits and attacks from Ghostfish? I'll use that as a frame of reference.
Funny enough, let's go to the next slide. And
there you go.
Yeah, we have some examples of commercial versions of that, and that's the first one on the list. So yes, I have had that before. Yes.
That to my taste, because I had that, I think I have some right in my fridge right now. That to my taste was one way of going to get a little bit of color, and that was had a touch of the Red Wing Amber millet from Grouse.
Yeah.
And that was primarily color in that. What I like to do with color, so I want to throw out there, since I'm talking right now, right? There's some really great books. My favorite three, because I don't have Bob's book here yet, because it comes tomorrow.
I see the Dark Lager book. That's a good book.
Yes. My favorite three are Dark Lagers. Fascinating chapter on possibly the origin of lager yeast with conjecture. Fascinating book. You have to buy it full price. It's not used anywhere. Hurst Dornbush is one of my favorite authors, other than Bob, because I haven't read Bob's book yet. Second one is Vienna Lager by Andreas Krenmeyer. This is a great book. It's all about barley. It's all about the style, the development. It was stolen from England. Malting technology was stolen from England to produce the Vienna Lager. It's fantastic. Bavarian Helles, and also this is also by Hurst Dornbush. He also wrote the Alt beer book. This is a brewer's publication style. This is number 17 in the series. And this is a great one too, and I really like Dornbush as an author. The idea that I play with when I develop color in the beer, and Vienna Lager is not on here. I would add that to this.
Oktoberfest?
These aren't all Oktoberfest beers.
I mean, fair.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, are we excluding Kilch?
What's that?
Are we excluding like a Kilsch style, or like what is our thought? Like where's your head at? I guess the sour, like the Berliner Weiss, if you will, I wouldn't necessarily assume to be Oktoberfest, but I guess, you know, I'm curious where you.
Well, I think the previous slide said Oktoberfest / German beer styles, right?
Yes, yes.
So
Wouldn't
yeah,
that be
so
Austrian?
so we're talking all ones here.
Sorry, the trivia got me
yeah.
specific like that.
Hold on, I gotta mute real quick.
I think
I think also
the Vienna Lager actually was kind of a progenitor of Märzen, is my understanding. I don't know.
Okay.
yeah, you know, and if anyone's ever been to like an Oktoberfest, at least here in the States, like, you know, it's not only Fest beer or only Märzen that they serve there. Like, you know, you can still get Weiss beer, you can get, so that, you know, I think that there's this maybe like misconception about what is strictly an Oktoberfest beer, because it has become known as like the predominant beer that is the most popular one that's served at these events.
I mean,
You
how
know,
many camps
but
have you been in Bavaria, right? Like one of the things that a lot of my friends, I haven't had a chance to actually go in the September months in Germany, but I have been during the summer, and like you go from town to town and there's like 2 beers in the town.
exactly. Yeah.
You know what I mean? And like same with the tents, like you know, you go from tent to tent and you're like one of my friends was like so like distraught. He was just like, dude, I thought like Germany was like beer mecca, man, and like I
So-
only got like 3 styles the entire time I was there.
So, sorry about that. My partner called me and wanted to know what fresh hop keg to put on.
Nice.
The other approach that I take is the idea that if you read the Vienna Lager book, all of the color, the entire original Vienna Lager, which I would call an amber lager, amber colored lager, the entire original style was all produced with 100% Vienna malt, and the color was developed according to Krenmeyer. The color was developed in the mash cooker because it was a triple step decoction mash. So they would take a portion out, boil it, bring it up to a boil, and then reinfuse that back into the main mash in order to raise the temperature of the mash. In the mash cooker, there was caramelization happening because it was a direct flame. And so you had this caramelization happening, which was then going back into the mash. And so you're developing this amber color. When we brew a Vienna lager with Vienna millet has no color. It's, you know, 3 SRM, maybe 4 SRM. And so we might get the correct flavor, but we don't get the color because we don't have that caramelization. So one of the things that led me to was, if you guys have used medium and chocolate roast Vienna, Bob, I actually got this idea from you originally, and then I asked Twyla to do it for me. So using like a little dash, like 2%, not more than maybe 2.5% of like a chocolate roast millet can give you that little bit of punch, that little bit of color. And Bob, that was your idea. So then I asked Twyla to take Vienna millet and roast it for me. And she came up with medium roast, chocolate roast, and dark roast. Dark roast I used in my Schwartz beer that I made. And the chocolate and the medium I use in a very small percentage in my Vienna lager, just as a way of getting that caramelization flavor in there and getting that color in there in an otherwise 100% Vienna millet grain bill.
Yeah, I think JP hit it on the money there. I think, you know, if you look back in history, most of those, you know, ambery red hues were added through decoction mashing. And, you know, lots of brewers have different opinions nowadays on if, you know, a lager, you know, this style or that is truly what people are saying it is, you know, if it's decoction mashed or not. I would say that if you look at it commercially nowadays, like JP said, most brewers are putting an amount of chocolate or some other type of malt, and that goes on the barley side as well as the gluten-free side. That's just, you know, it's less necessary to do things like decoction mashes nowadays. And that's not to say that there aren't some brewers out there that still do it the traditional way and make extremely exceptional beers, because there are. But just especially when you're talking a process like ours that already has a lot of added time to it, it takes more time to brew a gluten-free beer than it does a barley beer already. So, for me and for what we're doing at Groundbreaker, like anytime you can, shave a little bit of minutes off the brew day, you're gonna embrace that. And we do the same thing. Our amber lager is brewed in the, I guess for lack of a better term, more traditional Meriton Oktoberfest style. I don't want to speak for JP's Oktoberfest beer, but I think it's more of a modern like fest beer style. It's lighter in color, which is generally the distinguisher nowadays. But we do the same kind of thing. We just we use different malt. We use dark rice malt, but we use about 2% of the grist as dark rice malt. And it's just, to add a little bit of that color to it. And I think the trick with those techniques is that you don't want that acridity, which you're talking about, Kale, which is difficult to do. We've tweaked, but when you're talking about that flavor that's added to it, you get down to the points, the percentage, the tenths of a percentage can start to make a difference, which sounds wild, but like we've, for us, a 7-barrel batch of amber lager, say, you can tell a difference when you have 20 pounds of dark rice malt versus 10 pounds of dark rice malt. Like you can taste the difference in that kind of off flavor. And so, we've been brewing that beer since 2020, and every batch is kind of a bit of an experiment to see where we can land with that dark rice percentage to still get that, that like amber color that we're trying to get, but not have that sort of off flavor, that harshness that I think is added. And I think that that's a problem with a lot of darker beers, not just the reds and the ambers, but anytime you're making like a stout or a porter or a black lager, you need to be delicate with figuring out how to get that in there. And like JP said, the Red Wing Amber is interesting. I didn't know that that's what Ghostfish was doing with that, but I've often thought about trying that in amber lager recipe, as sort of like a bit of a replacement for the dark rice malt and some of the other malts we use for that beer. Just haven't got around to it yet.
Griffin's a good way to go too. Both the Red Wing Amber and the Griffin malt from Grouse, those are both based on Twyla's high dry concept, which is just like basically an extended kilning. So you're not getting the roasting, but you're just getting like a really dry product. And the millet, because as Twyla has explained it to me, because of the size of the grain itself, it just tends to basically toast up and color up a bit more.
And that's great. Those, anytime you can get those, deeper, rich properties from, an extended kilning as opposed to a roasting, like I'm all for that.
No, it's true. It's allowed us to kind of move away from the nuttiness flavor description, which you're kind of like, how many of these are going to taste like nuts, dude?
Nuttiness is definitely, you've got to embrace the nuttiness. You've got to put the nuttiness in the right place, and you've got to leave it out when it's not right. And I would definitely say that, Jesse, you're right. James Meriton this year is a little bit lighter, I think, than it was last year. I would always rather, even though I still call it a Meriton, I would always rather go just a touch lighter if it keeps it from getting that roasty or acrid flavor, rather than it being just the right color but the wrong flavor. So that's, being judicious with it and just little tiny additions. There's two other malts that we haven't talked about. And they're both rice. I make pretty heavy use of both of them. 15L biscuit is really, really good. You like that one, Bob?
Yeah, we recently added it to our third contact, and to echo Jesse's point, even at 20 barrels, literally 12.5 pounds per 10 barrel per batch, like literally changed that beer ridiculously.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. So 15L, I mean, biscuit's already one of the things that I put in everything that I make practically is biscuit rice. And so to get that biscuity flavor plus a little bit of color, it's fantastic.
I don't want to linger on this too long, but what is your thoughts around, especially towards the darker spectrum of maybe German beers? Let's just say that. The thought that time heals all beers over time. You know, there's these long lagering times. That what does that do to the flavors? I know from a commercial standpoint that probably is not. I mean, how much time do you get to sit there and lager a beer, or do you guys even do that? Or what's your thoughts around, hey, if I have this beer, maybe it's going to change over the course of 3 months?
I'll go last because I think I might be the heretic here.
Do you want to go first, Bob, or?
I'll go first. No worries. Yeah, we do 2 lagers now, so it is definitely a concern, especially since we are paying rental fees on per day basis with our tanks. So that is something that goes into how we factor a recipe, what ingredients we use, what yeast we use, what temperatures we ferment at. All of those things play a factor when you're looking at residency time. Like, I guess specifically looking at our Milsner, right? That is the beer that we struggle to keep up with because it does take, like 30, 35 days to do it. We're pushing it at 35 days, right? The first batch we did 30 days and we noticed a shorter shelf life. So we had to add that extra couple days. And in certain batches, when we're trying to still put throughput in that space, we have to transfer it, and that you run a risk anytime you transfer a beer. But adding it to the bright tank can sometimes shave off a day or two. So there's things like that, but you're dealing at scale, right? Like, a 20-barrel tank, is 10, 15 feet in the air, right? That's a lot of distance for the yeast to travel. And that's one of the reasons why you see so many large commercial lager breweries using sideways tanks. It's just a shorter distance for the beer yeast to have to travel. And it is a very significant factor, right? Like, if I were to comment on the first batch of Milsner versus the third batch of Milsner, the first batch of Milsner took on a slight appley note within like 4 to 5 months, versus batch 3, I could probably still drink that today sitting on the shelf, and it would be almost just as good as month 3. Right. And so there is a lot of factors in that. We see and we talk with some of the local breweries in Orange County, and the use of centrifuge gets thrown around a lot. The use of filtering gets thrown around a lot. And it is a really good idea because every commercial brewer that's assembled on this call, one of the largest concerns that they have when they brew a beer is specifically shelf life, specifically because historically our category just does not move as fast as a Modelo. So it's just how it is, right? And so you do need that beer to sit there for up to 6 months and still be as good as the day you brewed it, and that's a big freaking deal, right? Because there's so many beers that I've now tried from doing the show with Dominique that, like, you're just like, okay, wait, is this the ingredients, or is this a year-old beer, or is this a 2-year-old beer?
Yeah.
So it's a fact. I mean, I have never tried in the last 5 years. I have not had a fresh Glutenberg beer because it usually arrives on the shelf 3 months out of code.
I think that malt selection is definitely going to play somewhat of a role, but all things aside, all things being equal, if you will, if the beer doesn't start in a good place, time's not going to save it when it comes to lagers. Like, that's just not going to happen. Ales you can get a little more creative with to fix them in post, if you will. It's much more difficult to do that with the styles that we're talking about. So I'd say rule number 1, when it comes to this stuff, is if it doesn't start in a good place, it's not going to finish in a good place. And that's my experience. People may disagree with that, but that's been my experience on the homebrew scale as well as at the commercial scale. as far as like time wise, I would say of all I don't want to speak for anyone, but I'm guessing that of all the sort of commercial representatives on this meeting, we probably push the beer the hardest and the fastest. We definitely take it's a combination of needing to get things out quickly, but also I do think we do a pretty good job employing techniques that can make beer go faster without giving it what I would say like most people discern as like a difference. Warm fermenting our lagers, we do that. A lot of people think that that's a terrible, thing. You can't do that. It's got to follow this perfect 14 to 21 day curve, and you got to treat it like a newborn baby or whatever. But we we don't do that. We knock out our beer around 58 to 60 degrees, and we let it free rise to 65. And it does that over the course of a couple days. And then it kind of finishes in that range. We do a small scale VDK test on it before we crash it. And if it passes the test, we move it on to the next stage. And that's just, that's how we do it.
Are you guys doing forced diacetyl tests as well? Is that what you just said? Sorry,
yeah, VDK test.
Okay.
Basically what we do, and you need to do this on the homebrew scale, it's very simple, but you before you crash your beer, and this is very important, especially for lager beers, but people do it for ales too. But just pull up a small sample. You can put it in a flask if you want, really any kind of vessel. First of all, like do a sensory test as it is. If you smell butter right off the bat, it's not ready. It needs more time, but if you don't smell anything, bring it up to 150, 180 degrees and like a double boil. Give it 15 to 30 minutes and then give it another sniff test. And basically that process will accelerate the reaction that creates diacetyl, which is, I think probably the main thing you got to work towards not having in your beer when it comes to off flavors and these styles. Certainly there are other things to worry about, but that's kind of the big one that people worry about. And if it passes that test, you can move it on to the next phase, which for us is crashing beer. And I feel like we do that with amber lager. We do that with a new lager beer we're producing called 99 Light. We can turn around what I think is a great lager in 3 to 4 weeks, which is, I feel pretty proud that we can do that. I don't, notice any flaws, maybe some other people do, but I feel like, if it's a good batch from the beginning, it's going to be a good batch at the end, as long as you kind of take it in steps, take it in phases. You can rush it along if it's ready, but if it's not, don't. And I think that's kind of one of the main things. So for us, we use, like I said, warm fermentation. We also do, I don't know if you guys do this, but we do a technique that's harder to do on a homebrew scale. But it, some people call it like a 24-hour trube dump, or I've heard it called lots of different names, but essentially like a day into fermentation, you just do like a quick pull down on your tank. As the beginning stages of fermentation start, you get a lot of, kind of crud fall to the bottom of the tank, even in that early stage. And those can contribute to, acrid off flavors that can contribute later on in the beer to, apple off flavors. Lots of things can kind of be, nipped in the bud, so to speak, by just doing a quick, you don't want to dump everything out, obviously, but just like a quick dump. And like I said, that's hard to do on a homebrew scale. We have wonderful ports that we can just open up off the bottom of our tanks to make that happen. But that's kind of another quick and dirty technique that we use to, preempt any kind of off flavors and get the beer to move along a little faster. So.
I think I'm going to agree with you, Jesse, that I kept going back to the well on some of these bad beers I brewed, and I'm like, it's going to be good this time, right? It's been 2 or 3 weeks. It's going to be good this time. I kept going back, and it kept tasting really horrible. So sometimes it's just not going to work.
And you had
sometimes.
controlled the water profile on these beers, or maybe not so much so?
One of this one beer I'm specifically talking about is one of the first few batches I ever did, right? So there wasn't a lot of control of anything going on at the time.
Look, and the other thing is like these beers, you know, they feel so simple when you drink them, which is part of why they're amazing, but they're really, really hard to make, you know, like they're high difficulty beers to make, you know, and that's not just in the gluten-free world, that's in general, you know, like these beers, you know, like they're very delicate. They're so naked in the flavors and the aromas and the feel of the beer that flaws shine through on them, you know, like it's incredible how much an ale can cover up, you know, with the not just, you know, I think most people go to the well on hops, like hops can fix anything. But, you know, I think another thing that covers up a lot of flaws in ales is like the esters that are produced by the ale yeast go a long way to sort of like, you know, talking to your brain and making you think it's one thing or another. And there's a pretty, you know, aggressive discussion going on in IPA world right now on how much do of what you're drinking, like hop flavor versus like esters of yeast. And people have a lot of disagreements on that. But when we're talking these, you know, these styles of beer, these lagers, these Oktoberfest, you know, Kolsch, all these things, like they're really delicate, and you know, it's you can really notice those small differences. So,
all right, you ready for me here?
Oh, I'm ready.
My two thoughts. Okay, so absolutely the bottom thing on here on this list that we're looking at right now is the water. What's 90% of your beer but water? If you don't have the right water, it's not going to be the right beer. I am extremely lucky in McMinnville that we have the closest water profile to the water in Pilsen in the Czech Republic of like anywhere in North America. And we do add a little bit of water salts just for yeast health to the water, but for the most part, it is just straight out, you know, filter for fluoride, and you know, we're good to go. And it's the water that makes the beer. Okay, so the whole thing about what I do wrong. What are the elements of a lager? You've got the yeast, right? You've got fermentation temperature, maybe. You've got an extended holding time, right? What can we do with gluten-free? Oh, and then you've got barley, right? Barley makes a German lager, right? I mean, the Germans say that you have to have barley in a beer or else it can't be called beer in Germany. So we're already doing that wrong.
And Canada.
What I've found with the lagers that I do, I used to hold all my lagers a minimum of 2 weeks, and I did that because my mentor, Rick Allen at Heater Allen Brewing in McMinnville, holds all of his beers a minimum of 7 weeks for lagering. And so I was like, okay, I've got to, I don't have very big tanks. I'm not brewing very much. I need to do some kind of lager, but I settled on 2 weeks. And what I found, honestly, is it doesn't change the beer. It never, lagering a beer never makes it taste like it's made with barley. And so I don't do it. What I do is, depending on the beer, temperature control, and I use the right yeast. So the yeast that we use for the most part at Bierly is the 3470, which you know, is the Weihenstephan yeast. The one that's written about in dark lagers, that's that one. That is the biggest granddaddy of all lager yeasts, and is awesome, and is a tank, and can be warm fermented with no issues, and can be cold fermented. So 3470, that's what lagers start out for me.
Don't use anything else.
Yeah, I mean, the Swiss one's pretty good. I've used, what is that?
That's 189.
Yeah, that's pretty good. I like that one actually a lot. So next thing, do I want fruity flavors in my beer, or do I not? If I don't, it's 55. I'm fermenting at 55. That's where the yeast likes it without producing those fruity esters. If I don't care, or if they're going to burn off anyway, 68 all the way, baby, because it ferments out in like 6 days, and then crash it and can it and or carb it and can it, and we're good to go. So basically the biggest heretical thing that I do is like, I don't believe that that holding it for any specific period of time is going to make it taste anything any more like it's made with barley, and so I don't do it.
I like it.
Okay.
I mean, that's what I was doing at home, like when I was smaller scale, at least like 5 gallon, like 5 to 15 gallon level. Totally. I mean, I also like, for all of our small batch beers at Divine Science, like I focus on pitching temperature, which is probably one of the most important things for me, at least in what I've seen in the downstream. Because like it's SoCal, like we're not going to spend that kind of money at like the 15 gallon level to keep the place down in the low 60s even, you know what I mean? Like the thermostat is set at 77.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And Weinheim-Steffener does just fine if I pitch it at 55.
Yep.
And let it just do whatever it wants to do in the time frame that I let it ferment.
I will say too, when you're talking about pitching temperatures, I forgot to mention this earlier, but you know, there's a lot of research out there on you know, yeast shock and what that contributes to beers. I think for the longest time, like it's always been you know, thought that any kind of shock to your yeast is going to produce a bad beer. And I think what the research is starting to show now is that there's different you know, there's some ways of shocking your yeast that actually contribute positive attributes to your beer. One of the emerging sort of like you know, areas of research I've seen in yeast research specifically is pitching at a higher temperature, you know, waking the yeast up a little bit aggressively, especially in with lager yeast, can contribute body to the beer. You know, I think for a long time, like body in the beer has always been thought of like finishing gravity and like that's it. And you know, I think a lot of this research is being done now because of the emergence of the light beer category, you know, the re-emergence, I should say, of the light beer category. But when you're talking about these light beers, people are looking for ways to make them, you know, you want your you know, low cal IPA to feel like the high cal IPA in as many ways as you possibly can. And so body is one of the things that's really hard to recreate in like a, you know, session IPA or whatever you want to call it. And so there's a lot of research being done on how to contribute body to beers that isn't just having a high finishing gravity, which is obviously antithetical to making a low calorie, low carb product or whatever. And one of the things when we were researching making our 99 light beer was, you know, how do we add some body to this beer? I mean, it's a light beer, but you don't want it to feel like water, you know, like you want it somewhere in between, you know, what people are used to with like lager beers and then water, you know. So, you know, one of the techniques we use, you know, hopping, you know, dry hopping or other types of adding lots of hops can also contribute to body to beer. But one of the things we came across was some research on, you know, knocking out a little bit warmer than, you know, people would assume. And, you know, and that's not to say you treat the yeast poorly, you know, the entire time through fermentation, you know, like you don't want to treat them bad all the time, but just, you know, just give them a little wake up call, you know. And I think that's one of the reasons why we knock out a little bit higher than we see like traditional lagers happening at, is because we find that it creates a little body to the beer.
Yeah, we knock out at 65 for all the lagers, and then we crank it down to 60, pitch the yeast, give it 24 hours at 60, just so that it wakes that yeast up. We're doing fresh pitch on everything, especially with the lager yeast. I prefer the fresh pitch every time with the 3470. And then after that 24 hours, as soon as it's like really showing good activity, crank it down to 55 and let it sit there throughout its fermentation. Of course, when we're, you know, 3 to 4 points away, then we go just free rise up to as far as 68, which it usually tops out at 65 for a D-rest. 3 days at D-rest, and then just do, you know, testing to make sure we don't have any buttery precursors for diacetyl, and then it's crash and carbon can.
Mm.
You know, I have a question for you guys, because this is something I've been thinking about a lot. You know, and this kind of goes to, you know, judging beer competitions, you know, recreations of styles and all that kind of stuff. But something I've noticed the last few years, you know, at Groundbreaker, we have been making lagers a long time. You know, we did our first lager in 2020. We're not gluten-free lager pioneers like JP is. You know, but something I've noticed when I look at when I hear you know, like the judging notes or read the judging notes, and even when I read about a lot of lager styles in general, I think that there's some confusion about like that fruity aspect that you were talking about, JP.
Yeah.
And I've noticed that when we get judging notes back, and even in talking to people who are certified judges, they always perceive fruity as an ester, you know, like source contributor.
Mhm.
And you know, when you read literature about malts, especially malts like Vienna, one of the main notes on them is like fruity. You know, like there's a fruity contribution in the malt aspect. And I'm really of the opinion that there's a confusion in the literature and the judging and the teaching of these styles of beer having to do with that fruity aspect, you know. And I think when you come from ales, like there's definitely some fruitiness that is contributed from the yeast esters, you know, like that's, people understand that. But I think that when you talk about lagers, like there's some confusion about where fruitiness is coming from, you know. And that's not to say it can't be produced by yeast esters, but it's pretty hard to get a yeast like 3470 to produce those, you know, in my experience at least.
To produce fruity esters?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, like, the only issue that we've had is we've had to either dial malts back or change malts from that nuttiness element. Like the lager, like the first batch of Milsner that we ever did, I tried it like 14 days in, and I'm like, this tastes like ground up peanuts.
Yeah.
Like, whoa, what the
Yeah.
heck is going on? And then I kind of, you know, took a chance to kind of diagnose it and compare it to other beers, and it was really the light roast in that beer.
I think it's all the malts. I really do. Yeah, like it's.
Yeah. Well, when
I
we
think
pour
there's a
in the
misconception.
Vienna, when we pour in Vienna millet malt, like it literally smells like ripe fruit in the entire brewery.
Exactly.
And one of the things that's really interesting is when you look at actually how millet is talked about in other cultures, you know, I would maybe say, namely Africa, they call it millet berries.
Yeah. Yep.
And so it's like, that's at least what got called to mind for me. And it's like, you know, one of the things that is kind of cool though is that, you know, there was that question about DMS in the conversation for the collab hour on Thursday, and it's like, I haven't really seen it or had a problem with it, unless like maybe I used corn syrup at packaging because I didn't have like sugar on hand or something, and just like reached into the cabinet and was like, oh, okay, cool, this will be my priming sugar today, because it's corn sugar, right? But like that's literally like the only ever time that I've had that sort of an issue in a beer. And I'm like, I refrain from saying we're immune to it, but you know, that it could very well be one of the things that gluten-free grains are potentially immune to. I would say that acetaldehyde is one of the highest risks that we have.
Yeah.
Diacetyl somewhat, but like, yeah, if you use a Weinheim-Stephaner, like I'm confident that my Weinheim-Stephaner gets up into the 70s. And I haven't seen any issues, no autolization, no real issues with that beer. I've been doing a lot of cold IPAs recently, so thank you guys for being pioneers in that, because you guys got me like hooked on that style.
Yeah, baby.
Some of our most popular beers that we've released this year have been cold IPAs.
Cold IPAs rock. They're so fun to do.
Wonderful.
I've got
it's just like put stuff in a pot and then put way too many hops and then like just like stick it out back and let the sun heat it up and you're done.
Matter of opinion, JP, on too many. I don't know what you're talking about. If I only get a 2-gallon yield, that's completely fine with me. People don't mind paying $14 a pint, right?
Right. No, here's your beer, $20, please. I would say so. I have a couple customers that are, I think, super tasters for autolyzation and yeast. And I tend to sometimes get a little bit of autolyzation in beers that are made with some or a lot of sorghum, but not, and also some or a lot of pale buckwheat, interestingly. I have a couple customers that will pick up a little bit of a smokiness where there was none intended, and that can be evidence of autolyzation of the yeast. The DMS we're not immune to. I'm not gonna name names. It's nobody on this call, but I have tasted commercial gluten-free beer that was butter bomb before. So I know we're not.
Can you text me when this is over? Because I'm really fascinated, and not because I want to rag on whoever it is, but because I've never experienced it. And I know Jason is pretty vocal about this, that he thinks that it doesn't really exist in what we do here. And I'm also a little hesitant to go that far, but I've never experienced it in gluten-free beer, and I would be fascinated to
I'm gonna text you right now.
Okay.
Group text. Oh my gosh.
JP, are you talking about Beetle or DMS?
DMS.
Yeah.
Well, because butter, like, wait, just like butter, or are we talking like buttered popcorn?
Okay, so you know what? Do you remember what Rolling Rock tastes like?
Oh, how can I forget? So many nights of Rolling Rock as a young 18-year-old drinking underage.
Wait.
That's
Never.
that's like a DMS bomb. So so there you go, Jesse.
Okay.
Hey, who are those people?
Oh,
Okay. I had a suspicion.
so we're kind of hitting on our max time here, but and we didn't really touch on we were going to go through a couple of styles in a little greater detail, but great conversation. Thanks so much. I guess maybe like before we go, like this slide here is just primarily focused on, what grains on gluten-free would really lend themselves to this style, what hops. I mean, the hops are going to be the hops regardless of barley or gluten-free. And so we just threw up some examples of some common ones, some common yeasts that you may use, so on and so forth. Maybe guys, just give us a parting shot on like, whatever you want, like how does this fit into, like, what do you guys usually do in your brews? What's your favorite, beer that you guys make? What hops do you typically use? So on and so forth. Maybe a parting shot from each of you.
Satzer type hops are traditional for a lot of German beers. If you look at Satzer were actually prohibited by the King of Bohemia from being exported because of their extreme quality. And so German brewers were actually buying hop plantations and growing Satz hops, and that's a landrace variety, I believe, if I remember correctly. Growing Satz hops so that they could, and then brewing their beer in Bohemia so that they could sell it into the German market because the hops were so prized. There are a lot of Satzer type hops. I like using Satzer type hops and things because you can get things, especially with gluten-free beer. I find that the less amount of hop, vegetal hop matter that I can put in the beer, the cleaner the beer is going to be. So at least for me. So things like what's the New Zealand variety? It's
Pacific Jade or what?
No, the other one.
Sunrise? Pacific Sunrise?
Sorry, I'll think of it. But the one that I really want to throw out is the Michigan hop. That's Paradigm. Paradigm is a Satzer type hop from Great Lake Hops. And that hop is really nice to higher alpha acid level. So you get more punch for less vegetal matter. And that's kind of one of the things I like to play around with. Mount Hood is another one of my favorites. A little bit higher than like a Satz. Like last season, Satzers were coming in at like 2.5 alpha acid. So if I can get a 5%, I can put less vegetal matter in the beer, and I think it makes a better beer.
Okay.
Nice.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Saucers, anything that's like descended from that, or anything that's descended from Hallertau's, I like those a lot too. We use crystal hops in our 99 Like. It's a descendant of Hallertau. I think it's crossed like Mount Hood, which like JP, I think maybe you mentioned that, but those are great. I'm gonna quickly throw out the percentages for amber lager if anyone's interested. You know, make something better. I don't really care. I'm just gonna throw it out there, but for that beer, we do 32% pale rice malt, 22% Vienna millet malt, 11% Munich millet malt, 11% pale buckwheat malt, 8% rice malt, 2% dark rice malt. And then because we like to do one mash of single infusion on our system and not two, I add like for us, this one bucket of sorghum syrup, or 14% in percentage wise. So that's what we do for that.
Awesome.
And also 3470. No exceptions. Don't do anything else. I'm 3470 evangelist. All right.
Warm
enough.
fermented, of course, right?
Warm fermented.
Es necesario. Gracias.
I'm so proud of you, Jesse.
One of us.
What hop variety is that? Damn.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of Saws too. I mean, you literally can't go wrong with that hop. But I do really like Hersbrucker a lot. It tastes to me like hop candy. Middle Frewer is like eau de parfum for hops. It's just so floral and lovely that you can do anything with that hop. You can bitter, you can late hop, you can whirlpool, you can dry hop. I really love Middle Frewer a lot. I've made a lot of beers with that. In fact, my HomebrewCon seminar beer that was a clone of grapefruit IPA from Ghostfish was actually bittered with Middle Frewer.
Nice.
So yeah, I mean, you can't go wrong with those. One that didn't get an honorable mention here is Tettnang. Is probably one of
Tettnanger should be on there too.
that's one of, I love that hop a lot. That's our hop in Divine Light. That beer is like really simple. Like, you know, if anybody wants to brew that, if you can't get it in California, be my guest. I mean, there are some special elements that you do have to worry about because it is low ABV. You know, you do need to keep it cold after you package it. And so that's something that we've focused on when putting it out to market. Let me see if I can pull this up really quick.
Motueka.
Ah, good call. That's a good
Really
one.
quickly, do
Is
you
that
guys
the New
do
Zealand
late
one?
hop Additions for
Yeah,
these
that's the
styles?
New Zealand one.
Okay.
New Zealand Motueka hops are Sots descended.
Yeah, so like it's essentially 40% pale millet, 60% biscuit rice, and then, you know, essentially I would say like you could cut those back by like 2 or 3% because we have a little bit of millet seed and Munich millet malt in there. You know, it's tough to change this from a 20 barrel batch. And then we use Tettnanger at 30 minutes and 15 minutes in that one with a little bit of a lower pitch of 3470 because it's, you know, the starting gravity is like 1034, 1033. So yeah, we do a 2-step mash, a reverse step. You know, you can watch pretty much any one of my brewing videos on YouTube to know what that schedule is.
I want to throw something out there too. Might kind of be last minute, but Bob, you said you hop at 30 and 15. A German brewer believes very strongly that any hops that you put in the first about 15 minutes after the boil starts in earnest is just going to basically get surrounded by protein and drop to the bottom. So not like starting your boil, whether you do a 90-minute boil, I think that's some of the genesis of like a 90-minute boil with a 60-minute hop is just get it going, get that protein that's going to drop out to drop out, and then get your hops in. Or if you do a 60-minute boil and then don't put any hops in before 45 minutes, I think you can hop lower, and I think you can hop more like targeted that, and actually get it to maintain more of a hop aroma in addition to just the bitterness. So
I agree. I really do love the aroma of our Divine Light. You know, I love the way that biscuit and the Munich millet really play together really well in this beer style, which, you know, like literally is probably like 2, maybe 3 SRM. But I think that you still get a lot of what you're looking for in that style. I mean, it's tough, right? Like light lagers are now, yes, they're gaining popularity again, are becoming more of that like trendy item somehow. But at the same point, like there is this subtle nuance in kind of like how to express that and but still be craft about it,
Yeah.
you know. Also like setting out to do things like head retention in that low of a finishing gravity of a beer, that is actually rather difficult. And I do agree that you're right. It does come down to like the protein thing when it does come to hopping that light of a beer as well, right? So, you know, some of this was just really just more from an IBU calculation standpoint. But I do agree that there are certain, you know, concessions that can be made. Like the whole first wort hopping thing, that's pretty much gone away, right? Like you used to see that in a lot of IPA recipes and pale ale recipes. But now reading the new, I mean, it's called the new IPA. The book is like a couple years old actually. So I don't know how new this IPA still is from Scott Janisch, but I really love a lot of what was put forward in that book. I mean, it is a little bit deep in some technical facets, but I think that it still really helps you kind of like understand when you are hopping, because we focus so much on pre-boil just to make enough sugar in the beer that we can ferment something, that we oftentimes are kind of thinking about hops as like kind of a secondary thought. And I still think that's just as important as the first steps of getting to the boil.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely our German styles, it's so much less about the hops, and Beth, my brewer, and I laugh a lot that anytime it's German beer brew day, we like basically almost have to do nothing during the boil, because it's just like one addition at 45 minutes and then we're done. And then, you know, it's like yeast nutrient and things like that. And it's just so much easier because we did all the work in the mash. We did all the work in the pre-boil. That's where the beer is made.
Yeah.
Tyler hates it. He's so bored.
See, that's when I sit down and I'm like, okay, I got to send my sales emails now because it's the boil.
Fair. I feel you.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for everyone that joined today. Special thanks to JP, to Jesse, to Bob as the Brewers Roundtable. This is really informative. I think super gold star goes to Ed. What time is it? Ed is in the UK.
It's coming up to 2 a.m.
Yeah, our UK content late at night.
Yeah, right.
It's zero tolerance after dark.
I know. Yeah. Well, the way we started there, I was like, you know, after hours.
I hope you got something worthwhile, man. I really do.
Yeah, definitely. I've made 3 pages of notes, so yeah, no, it's really interesting.
Rock on, make some lagers. They're great.
Yeah, definitely.
That's right.
Excellent. Oh, and the last thing I want to just mention this at the end, and I know that Bob had mentioned this, that we all had unfortunately found out that our club member Ed Golden, who was a great friend of the club, very influential in the start of the club, had passed away. His mother had actually asked to join the club, and then posted that information, which was very sad to me, and I'm sure all of you. I had limited contact with Ed, but I think maybe Bob, I forget who it was. Someone reached out to me and said, "Hey, Ed has an opportunity, right, to write an article for More Beer, because he had presented in California to a barley brewing club and about gluten-free brewing, and someone in that club was did the content for More Beer. So he actually ended up calling me from Australia. This was a few years ago, and just the nicest person you'll ever meet. And everyone, of course, has mentioned his fantastic beers. The first anniversary party, one memory that I have of Ed was at the end of the party, he had, I think it was like a milk crate, like massive amounts of beers that he was giving out just to whoever would take them. I, of course, got several. They were all fantastic, as everyone said. It's a great loss to the club. And so we just wanted to make sure and just remember Ed's, and I didn't want the sad stuff to be in the start, so I put this at the end. I don't know if anyone else wants to say a word though.
I mean, I think Bob said a lot of what I feel. Is he was just very influential in the early days, and I know I learned a lot from him and was very inspired by him. So
Yeah, no, I love the way that he spoke about brewing. You know, you could really feel like there was this methodology, there was this directness, there was this matter of factness, and that's something that I take with me every time I do, say, like some sort of a presentation or something like this, right? Is that, you know, this isn't like we're making up fairy tales about, you know, a mythical brewing parallel universe. Like, this is real. Like, we are making beer here, right? And that's something that, you know, just always fills me with such pride, is to have known Ed, you know, and to have been able to just have any of that genius potentially rub off on me. Oh my gosh, like this, you know, it's interesting because, you know, he isn't necessarily the first to do what he did, but he's the first that I got to experience, right? Like, you hear about the Andrew Lavery's of the world doing these things and being successful with it, and then you see somebody like excelling in it. And that really truly was Ed, you know, and that's something that's so crazy because, like, he's buying most of his malt from the feed store. You know what I mean? Like, there was a question from the technical edit when I had been talking about that in one of my passages in the book, and they're like, "Are we allowed to legally put this in here?" And I'm like, I mean, if we need to cut it just for security's sake, that's totally fine. But this is a real location that gluten-free brewers are buying malt, or potential malt, right? That they are making into malt. So
I think for me, the thing I want to say is just how inspiring he was. Like, his decantion mash is what he called it, was not a method that I ever wanted to use.
yeah,
Never. And I was
pick, though.
And I was already wed to the idea of exogenous enzymes before we even discovered, before we even all started using Ondia and Ceramix and all of that stuff. I was like, I'm an enzyme brewer, exogenous enzyme brewer. But to hear him talk about it and to taste his beers told me that it was possible, you know, that the thing that I was chasing after was just right there to grab. And that's why, like I say, he inspired me to continue to push to make the beer that I wanted to make.
Yeah, and it's that with that inspiration, I approached Stuart and Kale recently. You know, there'll probably be a time in the coming weeks that I'll be posting this. I do want to try to get some club support behind some sort of a group brew or some sort of a trial brew that we as a group take on, and it is like a modification of Ed style that still does have a little bit of exogenous, but is still utilizing what we believe to have been discovered within certain grains, so certain enzymes that are intrinsic there, and then doing.
I think it'd have to be a wee heavy.
I think that's the only way to really pay the correct homage to Ed.
Yeah, it's got to be a wee heavy because that guy loved wee heavies.
Through that, man. I love that style. So yeah, I definitely want to get some sort of recipe published. I'll put together some sort of what I would think, you know, and probably I'll probably take from the AHA article that Ed put his wee heavy in, but we'll do a modified style of that where we still do use an exogenous enzyme or two, but where we are still utilizing intrinsic or endogenous enzymes.
Sounds like a good winter project, good winter brew to have.
Absolutely. Yeah. The timing's right. The temperature's right to where just about anybody can do this. Yeah, I definitely am excited about it because we've been doing some of these mash trials at Divine Science and have been seeing some very interesting results in our beers. One that comes to mind recently is a blonde ale that we aged on saffron rock candy. It was actually an attempt to make a blonde stout, but it turned into a completely different beer. So I definitely wanted to see what we could do to brew with consensus with this trial.
Cool.
Excellent. Well, we went so far over and above. We had so much fun today. We got Zoom. What is that called? Zoom bombed. I mean,
yeah, we got hacked, guys.
We got hacked. That's so exciting. I wish I would have recorded that so we could post that to YouTube.
Let me get banned from
like
YouTube.
What?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Jack Hoffman strikes again.
Yeah. It's always Jack. But thanks to everyone for joining. I really appreciate it. We're probably gonna have a meeting either next month or the month after, so I'm gonna try to keep these going. And I think that's it. I think we're good.
Thank you, Kale.
Cool.
Thank you, Stu.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Yeah,
everybody.
Take care,
Thanks,
everyone.
guys.
Great.
Thanks
Cheers.
all.
Cheers.
Take care.
Bye.
Take care.